What do you mean it's going back, policing's going back to the dark ages? Fortress mentality, what do you mean?
Well, they're locking themselves in large police stations, only responding to calls and not even responding to all of those. We look at drive-offs from service stations, for example, are now being treated as civil matters. Who in this country would not know that they need to go and pay for their fuel when they fuel their car? I mean, it's straight out theft, and police have withdrawn from catching those thieves. And they seem to be more and more retreating into a cocoon rather than generally getting out and interacting with the public.
Okay, so let's go through these things you've raised. Police in schools, what needs to be done there?
We need to get police back into schools so that we're teaching kids from a very early age that they have rights, but they also have corresponding obligations and responsibilities, and teaching them to consider the consequences of their actions before they do something rather than having to deal with the consequences afterwards.
So you see that as having a benefit in the terrorism fight as well?
Absolutely. I have no doubt that if you put police into primary and secondary schools, they would pick up on those kids that are likely to go down that terrorist track and be radicalised and are able to take action and see that there's early intervention.
The other one you mentioned is blue light, the old discos. They don't exist anymore, do they?
Well, they do. The Blue Light organisation's quite strong still,
Okay.
but Big Toll have withdrawn their support for it. And again, I just simply don't understand why they would do that. And one of the signatories of this letter, of course, is Ivan Ray, who was the founder and first president of the Blue Light organisation. Now, VicPol ought to be engaging with those kinds of organisations.
Yeah, so they can engage with the kids and
Absolutely.
spot the problems before they happen.
Absolutely.
What's New Start? What was that?
It's a rehabilitation program for young offenders. And again, while those programs are excellent, and there are a number of them, there's the ROPES program, there's the Bridge of Hope program for rehabilitating young offenders. They're all great, but they're all programs for people who have already offended. What we need to do is try and stop people offending in the first place, and particularly young people, because that's where most of our crime comes from. And we can only do that by getting them to it at an early age.
Do you see another thing that's been happening, wearing protective vests on duty, only travelling to and from work in plain clothes? Do you agree with that?
Not really. The fact of the matter is that if someone wants to identify a member of the police force, that's not very difficult. And shedding a uniform isn't going to really change that. You stand outside any police station, you can soon see who's coming and going.
So what are you advocating? Are you advocating a tougher approach or a symbolic approach? What is it?
I'm advocating getting the police to have a greater interaction with the community instead of withdrawing into their large police stations and only answering calls, to get out there and talk to the public, and, as I said, to get into schools, to get to young people, to interact more and not simply just respond reactively.
Well, it's more than that. You're saying that you think there's a message being sent that, well, they've given up.
Well, it seems to me that they really have. They've said, look, we're now too frightened to go about doing our jobs. We are sort of absolutely terrified that some sort of incident will happen. Well, of course, some sort of incident may well happen, but sometimes one has to run those risks.
The prospect of the police being too frightened to do their job is pretty scary.
It is, because everyone who signs on knows that there are inherent risks, and they have to accept those risks. Just a quote from my own past, I once pulled up 124 bikies on my own. Not very smart, but very conscious of the risk and terrified, but sometimes you need, as a member of the police force, to do those sorts of things.
But do you think that the people on the job are frightened, or is it a message being sent from above?
Well, I suspect that those on the job aren't as frightened as the hierarchy are of something happening. I think the hierarchy is frightened that something will happen, some tragedy, and they'll be criticised. If you're at the top end of the organisation, criticism comes with the position. You just have to accept it. And I think that the workforce is far less frightened than those people who are running the police force.
Where does it go if this isn't addressed, in your view? What happens?
Well, a downhill spiral, I believe. We'll continue to see the police force become less and less engaged with the public and lose that rapport that is so necessary to effective policing.
Is it ultimately increasing the risk of terrorism, this approach?
Well, I believe it is. I believe it offers encouragement to radical terrorists because they see that they're having an impact. And even if the decision was made to have police only work in pairs and so on, it ought not to have been publicly announced.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting point. How did the letter come about? I mean, as you say, I think there's 5 of you there, including several deputy commissioners, yourself, and very senior inspectors. Ivan Ray was one, and Edward Hart the other. How did it come about?
We were collectively concerned at the way things were going, and I've been a strong advocate for police in schools for a very long time. I introduced the program in Victoria, not an original idea, but I introduced it in Victoria in 1989. It ran for many years until it was in 2005 or 6 was abolished by Christine Nixon. Ostensibly because it wasn't being well managed. Well, if that's the case, we know whose problem that was, but it was having an enormous beneficial impact, and there were studies to show that. And so I've been keen to get police back into schools for a long time, to have that engagement with young people from a very early age, and to teach them that, as I said, not only do they have rights, but they have corresponding obligations and responsibilities. And I guess that's where it started. And Ivan, of course, as a founder of Blue Light, which was a great initiative, providing safe venues for entertainment for younger people, was also committed to doing something to help bring the demand on police resources down. If we can't get police resourcing up to the levels where police can handle all the calls for help, and that's not going to happen under any government in my view, then we need to reduce the demand on policing services, and you do that by attacking the root causes of crime. So it's a bit like medicine. You have institutes like the Florey Institute who do a wonderful job in researching why people are getting certain illnesses. That's a far better approach than building more hospitals. Well, crime's no different. You need to treat the root causes.
So you're saying as a result of what's happening here that we're not really servicing the community as well as they should be, not just on terrorism but on other things?
Oh, right across the board. No.
So what, not attending?
No, we're not. We're as a police force, I think, abrogating responsibility. And that's not a good thing. And I think a lot of the rank and file members would be appalled at the way things are going. I would hope that the new Chief Commissioner, and he's yet to take his seat, will have a different philosophy. Will you speak to him? Well, I'm sure he'll get the message. He might not want to speak to me after this, but but I'd be more than happy to speak to him, because I think he has an opportunity now to get Victoria Police back engaged with the community.
We're getting calls off air from police officers who say you're 100% right.
Well, that's heartening to say the least. Something I would like to hear.